Hey, have you heard any good books lately? This is Talking Audiobooks, your weekly podcast for all news, discussion, and opinion surrounding the wonderful world of audiobooks. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, wherever you are, whenever you may be listening. This is the Talking Audiobooks podcast, season number 2. Episode number 17. I am your host, the man with the face made for radio and the voice made for print, Casey Trowbridge, and as always, I am happy to be with you. I want to start this episode of the Talking Audiobooks podcast by extending my well wishes to those that have been affected by Hurricanes Harvey and Irma in recent weeks in Florida and in Houston. We're thinking about all of you. We are hopeful that your damage was not too severe and that you were able to recover from it fairly quickly. We are thinking of those who are displaced and without homes, and there are all sorts of charitable organizations endeavoring to help those affected by these disasters, and we wish you nothing but the best from us at the Talking Audiobooks podcast to those of you affected by the hurricanes. And if you are a Talking Audiobooks listener in Houston and you haven't heard this yet, Audible.com is going to be comping the memberships of Houston residents for the next 3 months. So you'll have your Audible membership intact, but you won't be billed for it for the next 3 months. That is something that they're doing for people affected by Harvey. One less bill you have to worry about paying, but it also doesn't force you to cancel a service that you like because you need to prioritize something more important. So they are doing that for you over the next 3 months. If you are a resident of Houston, you don't even have to do anything. They just are automatically doing it. And I wouldn't be surprised if some Florida residents are on the receiving end of that same offer in the effects of Hurricane Irma. So just know that whatever small part we can play in distracting you from the worries of these storms or whatever it may be, just know that the thoughts and prayers of the Talking Audiobooks podcast staff are with each and every one of you. We have a lot of things to discuss on this week's episode of Talking Audiobooks, but before we do that, I want to tell you about how you can connect with the show. You can visit our website at talkingaudiobooks.com, or you can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/talkingaudiobooks or twitter.com/talkingaudio. I am at Audiobook Casey, that's Audiobook CASEY, on Facebook, Twitter, and Goodreads. I'm always happy to connect with listeners of the podcast and with people who just love audiobooks in general. You can listen to the podcast at talkingaudiobooks.com, or you can subscribe in iTunes, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Spreaker, SoundCloud, Google Play Music, YouTube, or if you grab our RSS feed off of the website, you can manually add it to any podcast catcher of your choice, and you can listen to the show in any format that you would like. And that is how you can connect with us, and I would encourage you to do so. You can also email us at feedback@talkingaudiobooks.com. Let us know what you like about the show. Let us know what you don't like about the show. Give us suggestions for fan questions that we can ask the audience, or, just give us your comments, whatever they may be. Interview suggestions, we'll try our best to accommodate those. Just email us at feedback@talkingaudiobooks.com and start a dialogue with us on whatever subject matter you think needs to be brought to our attention, and we're always happy to deal with listeners to make this the best possible podcast we can possibly produce. And not trying to do a tongue twister there, but there you go. As I said, we have a lot of news to get into this week, and one of the first things to jump out at me was the announcement that Rosario Dawson has been cast to read the next novel from Andy Weir. This would be the follow-up to Andy Weir's The Martian, which is an absolutely tremendous book. I've talked about it on the podcast before. It was one that I listened to again back in June for Audio Bingo, just because I needed to listen to a favorite audiobook again, and I decided that I wanted to listen to The Martian. So I am very excited for Andy Weir's next book. It is called Artemis. It is about a female protagonist, and she lives on the only city on the moon. So casting a female narrator seems like an obvious choice, and Rosario Dawson got the call. This news was reported everywhere, including the Hollywood Reporter, so it's kind of becoming a big deal sometimes when celebrities get cast to read audiobooks, and that just sort of goes to show how audiobooks are making an impact in popular culture overall. Now, I am of a couple different minds about this news. Rosario Dawson has never narrated an audiobook before, so I don't know how good she is going to be at it. She's obviously a very capable actress, but as I've said on this podcast before, it's one thing to nail one part in a story, and it is another thing entirely to do everything. Narrator, all the cast, whatever. So it'll be interesting from that perspective. But I am also torn on it because having a celebrity narrate a major release is a double-edged sword to me. On the one hand, it helps bring attention to the industry overall, I think. And even though audiobook sales are going up and the industry is sort of becoming a more prevalent part of popular culture, more publicity isn't going to hurt. And you never know what's going to be someone's catalyst to dive into audiobooks for the first time. Someone may have seen the news, been a big Rosario Dawson fan, and decided that they were going to give audiobooks a try because she is narrating one. That is not out of the realm of possibility. And if they try it and decide that they like it, they become more avid listeners and they purchase more books and sales go up and, the industry benefits. So for the fact that it has potential to bring attention to the industry, I'm all for it. But I do sort of worry and wonder about what this may hold for the future, because even though celebrities narrating audiobooks isn't really anything new, it's not so common that it's becoming harder for professional audiobook narrators who make it their career to narrate audiobooks. It's not just something they do as part of a overall portfolio. This is their job. I don't think they're necessarily being crowded out of work by celebrity narrators just yet, but I fear that such a thing is possible. And the example that I give is animation. There are a lot of very talented voice artists in animation who cannot headline a movie because when all of the major studios cast their movies, they want big name celebrities to take those parts so that they can advertise this as a Steve Carell movie or a Tim Allen and a Tom Hanks movie or whatever. But like, Maurice LaMarche and Rob Paulsen are very capable voice actors, and you know them from Pinky and the Brain if you're an animation fan, and lots of other different things. They work all over in television animation and stuff, but they're not being asked to headline Toy Story as the voices of Woody and Buzz Lightyear. That's going to big name celebrities, and sometimes it works out very well. I think Tim Allen and Tom Hanks in the Toy Story franchise both have done tremendous work, but sometimes it doesn't work out as well, and it actually hurts the movies because of the casting choices that are made. It would have been better just to go with professional people who make their living specifically doing voiceover work instead of someone who sees it as a side project between live action gigs, because you'll get a better performance out of them. And I won't name movies necessarily where that might have been true, but it's all about names now. And I wonder if that's going to become true for the audiobook industry as well, if celebrities see this as sort of an in thing to do, and now it becomes easier to cast quote unquote big name celebrities to read your audiobooks, whereas before those same audiobooks would have been narrated by professionals who do this as a full-time job, who in mainstream pop culture aren't as well known, even if they are very much beloved and respected in the audiobook community itself. So again, you don't draw any conclusions from one casting announcement. Patterns like this start someplace, and it's going to be interesting to see as audiobooks become more and more popular whether or not that becomes an issue to tackle down the road. It may not, but it very well may as well. We'll just have to wait and see how it plays out. So I thought that casting choice was interesting for that reason. And we see this sort of thing in the Audies themselves every year. There's an Audie category, which is best narration by the author, which a lot of people in the narration and audiobook community sort of see as this is a way to feature audiobooks narrated by celebrities. And I've talked about this on the podcast before as well when I did the Audies recap. In dealing with that category, a professor who narrates their work of nonfiction might do an excellent job of narrating their audiobook, or a journalist who writes a book might do an excellent job of narrating their audiobook, but they're having to compete with autobiographies narrated by celebrities, and for fame and attention reasons, it's just not fair to them to be lumped into that same category. My theory is not as far-fetched as you may think, given that it's already sort of the reason for a specific category to exist in the Audio Awards. So I'm not exactly proposing a conspiracy theory here. Before we get into this news item, I just want to make it clear that this is not an endorsement, nor is it a condemnation. I'm just reporting the facts, and the fact is that Hillary Rodham Clinton released a memoir on September 12th, and it is a publication of Simon & Schuster Audio, and she did the audiobook narration. The book is titled What Happened, and it is her recollections on the 2016 presidential election, which is Any number of adjectives can be used to describe it. Interesting, perplexing, aggravating, divisive. Some would even call it fulfilling. Uh, that is not my place to judge here on the Talking Audiobooks podcast. My place is to report the news, and the fact is that this election was a big, big deal, and the fact that Hillary Clinton has published a memoir covering the election is a big, big deal. I like the fact that this is out so soon. I like the fact that it is already being released as opposed to her waiting a couple years to do it. And the reason that I like that is because I think that when it comes to biographies and memoirs, the sooner they come out after a particular event in someone's life, the better. It's one of those things where I think people are more honest immediately after something happens than they are when they have time to think and settle down and calm down, and things like that. Just my own life, that would definitely hold true. And I think that publishing something so soon, I think it's going to be more candid. I haven't listened to the book. I don't know if I will or if I won't. I will be transparent and say that I'm not a super big fan of the Clintons, but I do find them endlessly fascinating, which is actually a strong point in favor of me listening to this book, because there are a lot of people who I have read biographies of that I'm not necessarily a big fan of them, but since I find them endlessly fascinating, it makes me gravitate towards them and towards a book about them. I would say if you are a big Hillary Clinton fan, you probably are going to listen to this, and if you're a really strong detractor, you might not, but I actually think that the fact that this is out so soon means that it's going to be more candid than it would have otherwise been if she had allowed time to sort of dull her to what happened in the election. And she's said in the press that she has a public face that she puts on for public consumption, and this book isn't that. She's going to sort of let loose and maybe let her hair down a little bit. That's my phrasing, not hers necessarily, but she's going to be a little bit more honest. And sometimes you can be honest for better or for worse. Trust me, as someone who's pathologically honest, I can say that with great confidence. So I think this book is obviously going to be a big, big seller, and it'll probably be nominated for an Audie. I would be stunned if it wasn't, just based on impact alone. Audiobook of the Year is something where it's not necessarily about the quality of the writing or the quality of the narration. It's more about the impact that the book has on the overall culture and the impact it has on bringing awareness to the industry. And I would say that you're going to have to work really hard to come up with a title that will beat this one in that particular category. And again, I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm saying that's the reality of the situation. And so I would be surprised if this book was not nominated for an Audie in at least one category next spring. But we'll find that out in February or January or March or whenever the Audie nominations come out. But for right now, I am going to play an excerpt from What Happened by Hillary Rodham Clinton, and I want you to give it a listen, and perhaps you will decide from listening to the excerpt whether or not this is a book that will make its way into your audiobook library. Maybe it's a book that you'll borrow from the library. Maybe it's a book you'll wait, and if it comes on sale, you'll get it then. Or maybe you'll just decide to skip it. And again, that's personal preference, and I'm not going to tell you you're right or wrong for any reaction that you might have. I'm just here making you aware that this is a big release and that it's out now. So without further ado, here is an excerpt of What Happened by Hillary Rodham Clinton from Simon & Schuster Audio on the Talking Audiobooks podcast.
Draw from 2016 could help determine whether we can heal our democracy and protect it in the future, and whether we as citizens can begin to bridge our divides. I want my grandchildren and all future generations to know what really happened. We have a responsibility to history, to a concerned world, to set the record straight. I also share with you the painful days that followed the election. A lot of people have asked me, how did you even get out of bed? Reading the news every morning was like ripping off a scab. Each new revelation and outrage made it worse. It has been maddening to watch our country's standing in the world plummet, and to see Americans live in fear that their health care might be taken away so that the super rich can get a tax cut. There are times when all I want to do is scream into a pillow. But slowly, on a personal level, it has gotten better, or at least less terrible. I did quite a bit of thinking and writing, some praying, some stewing, and in time, a good deal of laughing. I went on a lot of long walks in the woods with my husband and our dogs, Tally and Maisie, who took all this much better than we did. I surrounded myself with friends and caught up on some of the shows that people have been telling me about for years, as well as a lot of HGTV. Best of all, I spent time with my wonderful grandchildren, making up for all the bedtime stories and songs in the bathtub I missed during my long months on the campaign trail. I believe this is what some call self-care. It turns out it's pretty great. Now when people ask how I'm doing, I say that as an American, I'm more worried than ever. But as a person, I'm doing okay. This book is the story of that journey. Writing it has been cathartic. I got angry and sad all over again. At times, I've had to step away, lie down, close my eyes, and try to empty my mind. This book has been hard to write for another reason. I've lost count of the number of times that I've sat at my kitchen table working on these pages, been interrupted by a breaking news alert, hung my head and sighed, and then took out my red pen and started revising. I've tried to make my peace with painful memories and recapture some of the fun that filled more days on the campaign than you might think. In the past, for reasons that I try to explain, I've often felt I had to be careful in public, like I was up on a wire without a net. Now, I'm letting down my guard. By the time I finished writing, I felt ready to face the future again. I hope that by the end, you'll be right there with me. I will always be grateful to have been the Democratic Party's nominee and to have earned 65,844,610 votes from my fellow Americans. That number, more votes than any candidate for president has ever received other than Barack Obama, is proof that the ugliness we faced in 2016 does not define our country. I want to thank everyone who welcomed me into their homes, businesses, schools, and churches over those 2 long, crazy years. Every little girl and boy who ran into my arms at full speed or high-fived me with all their might, and the long chain of brave, adventurous people stretching back generations whose love and strength made it possible for me to lead such a rewarding life in the country I love. Thanks to them, despite everything else, my heart is full. I started this book with some words attributed to one of those pathbreakers, Harriet Tubman. 20 years ago, I watched a group of children perform a play about her life at her former homestead in Auburn, New York. They were so excited about this courageous, determined woman who led slaves to freedom against all odds. Despite everything she faced, she never lost her faith in a simple but powerful motto: keep going. That's what we have to do now, too. In 2016, the U.S. government announced that Harriet Tubman will become the face of the $20 bill. If you need proof that America can still get it right.
And we're back. And now we're going to tackle what I think is the biggest news of the past few days. I mean, a casting announcement is interesting. A big book from a famous figure covering a historic event is also interesting, but the effect that those two things that we've discussed are going to have on the audiobook industry is really going to be felt in the short term. And the news that I'm about to discuss has the potential to affect the audiobook industry in a big way in the long term. And that's why I think industry-wise, it's the biggest news of the week. We're going to talk about the fact that Kobo has entered the audiobook sales arena. You can go to Kobo, that's kobo.com/audiobooks, and you can check out their audiobook service, which has just launched. It is a credit-based service like Audible, Downpour, and audiobooks.com. It is not a listen to as much as you can for a flat fee service like Playster or TuneIn is, but it is credit-based, which is sort of I would say, the more common business model in the audiobook industry. Certainly among the big players, it is. But what's interesting about their credit-based service is the fact that it is $10 a month, $9.99 to be exact. And that is a difference from the prices of Audible, which is $14.95 a month for one credit. Audiobooks.com is the same, $14.95. And Downpour is $12.99. So Kobo is entering the market with the lowest price. And right now they only have the 1 credit 1 month plan. They are planning to add plans for multiple credits in a month, and they are planning to add annual plans as well. So it'll look like the Audible service in a lot of respects, but at a discounted rate, and they are gleefully pointing that fact out. I saw a sponsored post on Facebook the other day from Kobo, and they were talking about the fact that, their monthly membership compared to Audible's monthly membership would save you about $60 annually. At the end of their post, it says, "Your move, Audible." And I kind of like that. I kind of like it when companies call each other out and sort of lay down the gauntlet. I like the Coke and Pepsi commercials that snipe at each other. I think it's fun for consumers to sort of watch the back and forth, and I think it helps innovation. If Kobo can really become a challenger to Audible and to the other big retailers, then they're going to have to change how they do things, and they're going to have to make their subscriptions worth more and stand out in a different way, or they're going to have to cut price or do something, whatever it is. It's all sort of murky, and you don't know if Kobo is even going to make a dent or not. You can get a 30-day free trial of Kobo by going to kobo.com/audiobooks. I probably am going to give it a try and report back in future weeks to let you know my opinion of the service. I don't really know how big their catalog is. One thing that sort of hurts them, in my eyes at least, is that they are restricted to certain devices that you can listen to audiobooks on. You can listen to them on your iPhone or Android phone, and you can listen to them on your iPad or other tablets. but there are devices that you can't listen to them on, like your desktop or laptop computer, and that is a place where I like to listen to a lot of my audiobooks. I have very nice desktop computer speakers, and I'm on my desktop a lot, and so I listen to audiobooks on my desktop quite a bit. And that's kind of a turnoff for me, but I will give it a try so that I can report back in the future on it. Something else that they have is a rewards program. So if you spend a certain amount of dollars, you get a certain amount back in rewards points. And once you've accumulated a certain number of rewards points, you can redeem them for different titles. Kobo, if you don't know, is the sort of the books arm of the Rakuten website, which used to be buy.com. With that having all been said, if you are going to try the Kobo service, I'd love to know what you think about it, because as I said, it could have a big impact on the industry going forward if it manages to gain ground. And it doesn't have to take over as the industry leader or anything like that to get noticed. It just has to make an impression, and if it does that, I think the bigger retailers are going to notice, and they will have to respond in some way. And so it will be interesting to see how the Kobo service turns out and what it evolves into. They are going to add annual plans and multiple credit plans like Audible, so it'll be a lot like the Audible service, just cheaper, which they are pointing out, as I mentioned before. And so it will be interesting to see if, when, and how a website like Audible reacts to the sort of aggressive way that they are sort of trying to get their names out there. And maybe they don't do so well, and maybe they find out that they have to raise their price to the $14.95 that Audible or audiobooks.com charges, or the $12.99 that Downpour charges, just to be profitable at whatever they are getting from a customer base perspective. So I think the Kobo thing is the one bit of news that we've discussed this week that has the potential to have a impact on the audiobook industry in the much longer term, although it could fizzle out. You just never know. Things rise and fall all the time, and you just never know how it's going to work out. So it'll be interesting to watch things over the next few months and over the next couple years, just to see how things shake out. So if you give Kobo a try, let me know what you think. I'm probably going to give it a try and report back in the next few weeks on my own. But if you are out there looking for a new avenue to get audiobooks and you haven't tried Audible ever, or if you haven't tried Audible in quite some time, you can get a free trial of audible.com and help out the Talking Audiobooks podcast in the process. And producer Ken is going to tell you exactly how to do that right now.
For you, the listeners of the Talking Audiobooks podcast, Audible is offering a free audiobook download with a free 30-day trial to give you the opportunity to check out their service. To download your free audiobook today, go to audibletrial.com/talking audiobooks. Again, that's audibletrial.com/talking audiobooks for your free audiobook. And now, back to your host, Casey Trowbridge.
And thank you, Ken, for that information. What I'm going to do right now is talk about some of the audiobooks that I've been listening to lately. And I decided to do that this week because I saw a post in the Audiobook Addicts Facebook group that I'm a member of, where someone was asking for podcast recommendations for audiobook news and reviews, and I thought that I do a pretty good job of keeping you guys informed as to industry news and things that are going on inside the audiobook industry, and I do a pretty good job of telling you what I think of a book that I've listened to in connection with an interview. I think I do a good job of talking about that with the author or narrator or whoever I'm talking to about that title, of giving my honest opinion of those when I do the interviews. But when I'm just listening to audiobooks, I haven't really done a review in a while, so I wanted to change that this week, and I'm going to do a batch of reviews. They're not going to be terribly long. Next time I'll probably do fewer than I'm doing this time and tinker with the format a bit, but I'll try to do these every now and again just to kind of give you an idea of the things that I'm listening to. And of course, that means that these are going to appeal to my own personal taste more than they might to yours. So with that, we will get into the reviews that I have for this week. I listened to 3 Star Wars audiobooks to start out the month of September. I listened to Battlefront 2 Inferno Squad by Christy Golden, narrated by Janina Gavankar, which we talked about on the podcast previously. And then on September 1st, Force Friday, 2 audiobooks came out, and they were Phasma by Delilah S. Dawson, narrated by January Lavoie, and Leia, Princess of Alderaan by Claudia Gray, narrated by Saskia Marleveld. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on any one of these books in particular, because not everybody is a fan of Star Wars, and if I spend too much time on one, that'll take up the whole program, and so I will try to keep my thoughts on each briefly. Phasma was the first one I listened to, and I gave that one a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Things that I didn't really like about the book is that for a lot of it, it's just kind of Phasma and these other characters wandering around in the desert, and they had some good action sequences at times, and they met some interesting characters along the way, but a lot of times it's just a long walk for Phasma and these other characters. And part of my problem with this book is my disinterest in Phasma, the character, thanks to the Force Awakens movie. And the reason that I don't really care that much about her is the way she was handled in the film. When the film came out, she was this hyped character as being sort of a badass, and then she didn't really have a lot of screen time. And then, spoiler alert, when the Resistance get to Starkiller Base, like, Phasma just kind of like folds and gives in to them and doesn't really put up much of a fight when she's confronted by them, and it just kind of rubbed me the wrong way at the time. And part of the book's purpose is to sort of explain why that happened, explain that it's really not a surprise that she acted that way. This is a prequel, so it's sort of retconning the movie in that respect by framing that moment as being part of her character and being just a part of who she is. And I guess it worked in that respect, but it felt like a little bit of too little too late for me. I might be in the minority of fans in that respect, but that's just kind of how I felt. So I gave it 3.5 stars out of 5, and January Lavoie's narration is excellent as always. She's a quality narrator in general, and a quality Star Wars narrator specifically.
Turns around as if desperately interested in the hyperspace swirls darting around them. When the Resistance assigned her the droid, Gigi was the factory colors, white and blue. But Vi painted her new friend yellow and copper to match her own bleached yellow hair and burnished brown skin. Vi turns back around and knits furiously. Her hair is cropped short just now. The last time her image popped up on a wanted list, the long red braids had been far too noticeable, so she'd hacked them off immediately and ejected them into space. Wiry and petite, she's had a hard time finding Resistance uniform pieces that fit her well. The cobbled-together costume she wears now has been altered and shows its long wear in rips, scuffs, and patches. Even the soles of her boots are torn to shreds. Her current assignment has involved some very physical work in a terribly unpleasant place, and she's looking forward to a few days of rest on Dakar. Hyperspace lulls her to sleep, and Vi manages a short nap tangled in thick, soft yarn before Gigi beeps and whirs to let her know they've nearly reached their destination. She sits up and stretches as much as the cockpit will allow, wishing the Resistance had provided her with a roomier ship, but knowing that for ships, much like for herself, being small and unassuming often means avoiding detection. The ship emerges from hyperspace to float gently in the middle of nowhere, exactly according to plan. Taking a deep breath, she puts her knitting away and types a long code into her comm. The answer is immediate and, as always, mysterious. They never say more until she's confirmed her identity. Copy. Starling reporting to General Organa. A familiar voice replies, warm but professional. Welcome back, Starling. What have you got for us? General. It's always business first, isn't it? When the galaxy is on the line, I have a way of skipping past the formalities of my youth. Let's hear your report. Vi can hear Leia's smirk and likes her the better for it. No wonder they get along. Finally found the missing piece of the puzzle, although I had to hunt around. Rough place. Everything is rough in the unknown regions. So you have what we need? Vi shrugs. Knowing how monsters became monsters doesn't always help destroy the monsters. Sometimes it does. Every weapon in our armory has a use, Starling. Now I know you're due for some time off, but I've got one more set of coordinates, and you're already in the right corner of the galaxy to drop by. Can I count on you? Vi looks down at the blue yarn spilling from her bag. She hates putting off time with Ba'alko. They see each other so rarely these days. Of course, General. That's why I'm here. Transmitting coordinates. On her screen, Vi plots the best route to the General's next stop. Leia wasn't lying. She's already pretty close, and not many pilots have the experience or the guts to explore this shadowy corner of nowhere. She confirms the route and lets Gigi plot the jump. Not too bad. I'll be there shortly. Good. Just a quick sweep of the area. We've heard rumors of first-order ships there, and it's vital that we know if they're true. If you see anything, be ready to jump. We've had several pilots go missing. Bet they weren't as fast as I am. Leia sighs, sounding every year of her age. It's not necessarily about speed, but if they come back, you can race them in the 5 sabers. I'll buy you a ship. For now, just a quick sweep and then home. I need those reports. Aye, aye, General. Vi salutes, wishing they had visual. About to enter hyperspace. Keep safe, General Organa. You too, Starling. The line cuts off. The Starhopper zooms into hyperspace. It's a short trip, not relaxing at all, and she doesn't bother picking up her knitting again. She's jittery now. It's been too long since she's slept. And then they're dropping out of hyperspace again. The long lines of stars judder into pinpoints against a sea of black. Vi's eyes adjust, and she mutters a curse. There should be nothing here, just peaceful darkness and twinkling lights. Unfortunately, there's rather a large...
Battlefront 2 Inferno Squad, I also gave a 3.5 out of 5 to. I liked this book. I would have liked a little bit more out of it. It didn't quite live up to my expectations. I was hoping for more of an explanation as to why the Empire has loyalists like this and what their motivations are. I thought the character development could have been stronger. I like the story elements. I like they infiltrate the partisans that are left after the events of Rogue One. But I don't know. It was leaving a little bit to be desired in the character development. realm, and I was sort of looking forward to some of that. I wanted to find out a little bit more about the internal logic of people who are loyal to the Empire because they see the Empire as being an improvement over what their lives were like before the Empire. And I didn't really get a lot of that out of this book. There are people who are loyal to the Empire, but it's a family thing more than a, life on this planet sucked before the Empire came and restored order, and we're grateful. And that's kind of what I was hoping for. I was hoping for people who, as I discussed on the podcast before, people who were true believers in the Empire because maybe the Empire wasn't perfect in their eyes, but it was a lot better than what they had before the Empire, which is certainly a possibility, but I thought it wasn't there in this story. And Janina Gavankar did all right with the narration. She did very well with the main character of Iden Versio, which makes sense because she voices that character in the video game, and her other narration was okay, but I really did enjoy it when she was speaking as Iden Versio. I enjoyed that one a little bit more than Phasma, even though I gave them the same score, 3.5 out of 5.
When the Death Star's superlaser had targeted and obliterated Jeddah City, the Empire had landed a 1-2 punch in a handful of seconds. It had destroyed not only the rebel terrorist Saw Gerrera and his group of extremists known as the Partisans, but also the ancient temple of the Khyber, held sacred by those who secretly hoped for the return of the disgraced and defeated Jedi. Jeddah City represented the first real demonstration of the station's power, but that fact was known only to those who served on the Death Star. For now, to the rest of the galaxy, what had happened at Jeddah was a tragic mining accident. Things had happened with shocking speed after that, as if some galactic balance had suddenly drastically been tipped. The superlaser was again employed at the Battle of Scarif, this time wiping out an entire region and several rebel ships trapped under Scarif's shield along with it. Emperor Palpatine had dissolved the Imperial Senate. His right hand, the mysterious caped and helmeted Darth Vader, had intercepted and imprisoned secret rebel and now former senator, Princess Leia Organa. The Death Star's director, Grand Moff Williff Tarkin, had used the princess's home planet of Alderaan to demonstrate the true breadth of the power of the now fully operational battle station. As nearly all on the Death Star had been ordered to do, with their own eyes or on a screen, Iden had stood and watched. By their treasonous actions, the rebels on Alderaan had brought destruction not only on themselves, but on the innocents they always seemed so keen to protect. She couldn't get the image out of her head. A planet, a world, gone in the span of a few seconds. As soon would be virtually all of the Empire's enemies. In a very, very short time, the galaxy would receive an implacable and thorough understanding of just how useless resistance would be. And then there would be order. And this ill-thought-out, chaotic rebellion would subside. All the extensive hours of labor, all the credits and brain power spent on controlling and dominating various unruly worlds could, at last, be turned to helping them. There would, finally, be peace. The event would be shocking, yes, but it had to be. And it was all for the greater good. Once everyone was under the auspices of the Empire, they would understand. And that glorious moment was almost there. Tarkin had located the rebel base on one of Yavin's moons. The base and the moon were but a few moments from oblivion. Some of the rebels, though, were not going to go quietly. These few had taken to space and were presently mounting a humorously feeble attack on the gigantic space station. The 30 Y and X-Wing fighters the rebels had mustered were small enough to dodge the station's defensive turbolaser turrets, zipping around like flies. And, like flies, this nominal, futile defense would be casually swatted down by Iden and the other pilots in ship-to-ship combat, as per orders from Lord Vader. Within the span of 7 minutes, Yavin's moon and all the rebels it had succored would be nothing more than floating debris. On this day, the rebellion would be no more. Iden's heartbeat thudded in her ears, and she all but jumped down the ladder into her fighter, sealing her flight suit and pulling on her helmet. Slender but strong gloved fingers flew over the consoles, her gaze flitting over the stats as she went through the pre-flight checklist. The hatch lowered, hummed shut, and she was encased in its black metal belly. A few seconds later, she was swirling in cold, airless darkness, where the distinctive scream of her vessel was silent. Here they came now, mostly the X-Wings, the Rebellion's answer to TIE fighters. They were impressive little single-occupant vessels, and they skimmed along close to the surface of the station, a few of them misjudging the distance and slamming into walls around the trenches that crisscrossed the Death Star's surface.
Leia, Princess of Alderaan is a young adult novel by Claudia Gray, and I gave that one a 4 out of 5. I really like this story when contextualizing it compared to the other two that I listened to, but it's a good story in general. Claudia Gray is one of my favorite Star Wars authors. I loved her book Lost Stars. It's one of my favorite Star Wars novels ever. If someone were to ask me what Star Wars novel should I listen to for the first time, I've never gotten into the books before, I would have them start with Lost Stars. It's just that good. And she did another one, Bloodlines, The New Republic, and that one was also good. That one set just a few years before the events of The Force Awakens. So she's 3 for 3 in my book. And this is about a young Princess Leia. She's just turned 16. She's just undertaken the ceremonial right to the throne of Alderaan. It's a ceremony that acknowledges that she will be the queen one day, and she has to complete these tasks before it can really be official, but she goes about doing that, and that sort of brings the conflict in the story. She has conflict with her parents. They're being secretive and keeping her out of the loop on certain things, and they have their reasons for that, and she sort of discovers what those reasons are, and it leads to more conflict. And I just think of the 3 stories, this one was the best and the one that I found the most interesting. The narration by Saskia Marleveld was also very good. I thought she did some of the characters perfectly, and it matched the tone I think the author was going for very well. Star Wars has quality narration. Casting, whoever does casting for these books knows what they're doing, because the narration is always at high quality and it always seems to fit the work really, really well. And so I commend them for that. All of these come from Random House Audio or imprints of Random House. The young adult novel came from Listening Library, but it's a different division of the same empire, so to speak. So those are sort of my thoughts on the 3 Star Wars novels I listened to in September.
Had sometimes had to fight their way to the throne room. It was meant to be a moment of strength and command. In other words, not a moment to prove you couldn't even show up on time. Alderaan's royal palace had been the work of more than a millennium. Their monarchy was one that dedicated itself to serving its people, so they'd never built high spires or commanding towers to dominate the landscape. Instead, new chambers were added every few decades, creating a sprawling labyrinth where modern data centers and hollow chambers existed side by side with ancient rooms hewn from stone. Leia knew each hallway, each door by heart. As a small child, she'd reveled in exploring some of the most shadowy, out-of-the-way passages. Sometimes she thought she might have been the only person in centuries to have found every single room in the palace. Fortunately, she knew a shortcut through the old armory, which got her to the antechamber of the throne room in plenty of time. The royal guards smiled when they saw her, and she grinned back as she straightened the cape of her gown. To the taller guard, she whispered, "How's the baby?" "Sleeping through the night already," he replied. Leia mimed applause, and he ducked his head, almost bashfully. Really, she didn't know much about babies, except that parents were very proud of them, even though they kept everybody up at night. But if the guard was happy to have a sleepy baby, then she was happy for him. "We're lucky on Alderaan," her father had said as they sat by the library hearth. "We are loved by our people. We have their loyalty. That's because we love them and are loyal to them in turn. If we ever cease to appreciate those around us, from the highest lord to the humblest laborer, we'll lose that loyalty. We'll deserve to lose it." Leia was jerked back into the moment by the rustling of the velvet curtain at the door. Swiftly, she went to the wall where the Rindan sword hung, grabbed it by the hilt, and took it in hand. She'd practiced with it a few times, but its weight surprised her every time. Position. Doorway center. Sword, both hands on the hilt, arms close to body, blade upright. Speech. "I remember the speech," she told herself. "I definitely remember it. I'm just blanking on it at the moment, and it'll absolutely come back to me when I'm standing in front of hundreds of people." The curtain was tugged to the side. Brilliant light, tinted by vast panes of stained glass, fell on her. 200 guests turned as one, all of them standing on either side of a blue and gold carpet that traced a line directly through the room to the golden thrones where Bria and Bail Organa sat. Leia marched forward, sword held high. A low rumble of thunder made her grateful for the candle droids projecting light through the windows. Otherwise, the room would have been nearly pitch black. She'd practiced this, but didn't think she could do it with her eyes closed. I don't know. It might have been easier if I couldn't see all the guests staring at me. Leia had spent her entire life appearing before crowds, but today was the first time they would hear her voice in an official capacity, as their future queen. Bria Organa wore a dress of bronze silk, her hair piled high atop her head in braids woven through with strings of beads. Next to her, Bail Organa wore the traditional long jacket of the Viceroy. The crown itself had been brought back from the museum to sit atop a marble pillar, illuminated by a candle droid of its own. Her parents looked even more regal than usual, almost forbidding. Were they enjoying the charade? Leia thought she was, or she would be if her parents had invited fewer people. Usually only a handful of off-worlders would be present, but this time her father had asked many of his diplomatic allies in the Imperial Senate. Tinra Pamlo from Terrace, Cinderon Mulp of Darella, and both Winmi Lens and Mon Mothma of Chandrilla. Mon Mothma smiled even wider as Leia passed her. Maybe she meant to be encouraging. As long as she didn't think Leia looked cute. The Day of Demand wasn't about being an adorable little kid. It was about growing up. When she reached the front of the...
Another book I listened to recently was American Assassin, which is, chronologically speaking, the first book in the Mitch Rapp series. It wasn't the first book written. That would be Transfer of Power, which is later in the timeline. But I started with American Assassin to go in chronological order because that is the order that I prefer to go in, chronological as opposed to publication. And I listened to this one because the movie is coming out and I wanted to listen to the book before I went and saw the movie. And I really enjoyed this book. It grabbed me right away and didn't let go. It did not take me terribly long to get through this one. This is, of course, written by Vince Flynn, narrated by George Guidall. This is a publication of Simon & Schuster. I really enjoyed this book. It's one of those things where George Guidall accomplishes more in the audiobook industry in a given day than I ever will in my entire life combined, and is an excellent narrator, but sometimes I have a little bit of a problem with his narrating these books where the protagonists are very young, because he is in his late 70s now, and he has a voice that is a great voice. It's actually carries a lot of sophistication and weight to it, but it's also, he does sound old. So reading for younger characters, sometimes I have a hard time picturing that voice with that character. His narration is quality, but I think the voice doesn't always match. But in this case, I really enjoyed everything he did. One thing that helps is that there's a character in this book that is absolutely hilarious to me, and he's an old crotchety fellow, and George Guidall puts on a great voice for that character, and like he's manic and a little bit crazy, and the voice just is so perfect for what he's trying to do. In the past, where I've had sort of a problem with George Guidall giving voice to characters who are so young when he doesn't exactly sound young himself, that was all negated in this performance, because his performance was just so good, and his vocalizations of other characters were just so much fun that I didn't really notice my normal problems with his voice as it relates to younger characters. And so I'm so glad he narrated this book. It was so awesome. I give the narration 5 stars. It was just so perfect. And like I said, the story was great. It caught me up in it right away, and I just couldn't wait to hear more. And this is my first experience with the series. It will not be my last. As to why only 4.5 out of 5 stars instead of 5, it's just because it's very hard for me to give 5 stars. That's just the way it is. I don't do it very often, and that's just how I am as a reviewer. 4.5 is where it lands. It's absolutely tremendous. I loved it. I recommended it to everybody, but I just didn't feel it was quite gush-worthy enough to make it 5 stars. If you have to ask me what the difference is, I don't know that I could explain it very well. It's just an intuition that I have, a feeling. It's all about feelings for me. And I felt like this one was very, very good, maybe even excellent, but truly, truly outstanding. It just falls a little short of that, but absolutely wonderful. I can't wait to see the movie. So that's kind of my thoughts on American Assassin by Vince Flynn, narrated by George Guidall for Simon & Schuster.
And ultimately he would emasculate himself by questioning the size of his balls for as long as he lived. Rapp shuddered at the thought. He might be a little crazy, but he'd read enough Greek tragedies to understand that a life filled with that kind of recrimination would eventually lead him to the psych ward. No, he thought. I'd rather go down swinging. He nodded to himself and took a deep breath before walking over to the window. Rapp gently pulled back the tattered curtain and looked down at the street. The 2 foot soldiers from Islamic Jihad were still positioned across the street, keeping an eye on things. Rapp had dropped a few hints around the neighborhood about what he was up to, and they had shown up barely an hour after he had pressed his $700 bill into the willing hand of a local merchant. Rapp had considered killing one lackey and interrogating the other, but knew word would spread so fast that his colleagues would be either moved or killed before he could act on whatever intel he could gather. Rapp shook his head. This was it. There was only one avenue open to him, and there was no sense in delaying what had to be done. He quickly scrawled a note and left it on the small desk in the corner. He gathered his sunglasses, the map, and a large wad of cash and headed for the door. The elevator was broken, so he walked the 4 flights to the lobby. The new man behind the front desk looked nervous as all hell, which Rapp took as a sign that someone had talked to him. He continued out the front door into the blazing daylight and held his map above his head to block the sun while he looked up and down the street. Looking out from behind the sunglasses, he pretended not to notice the duo from Islamic Jihad. With his face buried in the map, he turned to the right and started heading east. Within half a block, Rapp's nervous system began sending his brain alarms, each more frantic than the previous one. It took every ounce of control to override his training and millions of years of basic survival instincts that were embedded like code into the human brain. Up ahead, the familiar black car was parked across the street. Rapp ignored the man behind the wheel and turned down a narrow side street. Just 30 paces ahead, a rough-looking man was stationed in front of a shop. His left leg was straight and firmly planted on the pavement, and the other bent up behind him and placed against the side of the building. His big frame was resting against the building while he took a long drag off his cigarette. There was something vaguely familiar about him, right down to the dusty black pants and the white dress shirt with the sweat-stained armpits. The street was otherwise empty. The survivors of the bloody Civil War could smell trouble, and they had wisely decided to stay indoors until the morning sideshow was concluded. The footfalls from behind were echoing like heavy shoes on the stone floor of an empty cathedral. Rapp could hear the pace of his pursuers quicken. A car engine revved, no doubt the black BMW he'd already spotted. With every step, Rapp could feel them closing in from behind. His brain ran through scenarios with increasing rapidity, looking for any way out of the impending disaster. They were close now. Rapp could feel them. The big fellow up ahead threw his cigarette to the ground and pushed himself away from the building with a little more spring than Rapp would have guessed him capable of. He filed that away. The man smiled at him and produced a leather truncheon from his pocket. Rapp dropped the map in feigned surprise and turned to flee. The 2 men were exactly where he expected them to be, guns drawn, one pointed at Rapp's head, the other at his chest. The sedan skidded to a stop just to his right, the trunk and front passenger doors swinging open. Rapp knew what was next. He closed his eyes and clenched his jaw as the truncheon cracked him across the back of the head. Rapp stumbled forward and willingly fell into the arms of the 2 men with pistols. He let his legs go limp, and the men struggled with his weight. He felt the arms of the big man wrap around his chest and yank him upright. His 9mm Beretta was pulled from the back of his waistband, and he was dragged the short distance to the car's trunk. Rapp landed headfirst with a thud. The rest of his body was folded in on top of him, and then the trunk was slammed shut. The engine roared, and the rear tires bit through a layer of sand and dirt until they found asphalt. Rapp was thrown back as the vehicle shot away. He slowly cracked open his eyes, and as expected, he found himself enveloped in darkness. His head was throbbing a bit from the blow, but not too badly. There was no fear on his face or doubt in his mind, though. Just a smile on his lips as he thought of his plan. The seeds of disinformation that he had spread over the past day had drawn them in just as he'd hoped. His captors had no idea of the true intent of the man they now had in their possession. And more important, no idea of the violence and mayhem.
The last book I'm going to talk about today is one that I got from Jess the Audiobook Worm, who you've heard from on this podcast before and who you will be hearing from again very, very soon. This was one that's on her Adopt an Audiobook page. So if you go to theaudiobookworm.com and look for the Adopt an Audiobook link, you can click on that and see her entire catalog of audiobooks that you can adopt. If you adopt an audiobook, you get a code from Audible for a complimentary copy of the book that you have adopted. In exchange, agree to leave an honest review of that title. Back in July, I was browsing her listings and I came across a book that looked interesting to me, and I read the summary and I liked what I read, and I liked the setting because the summary described where the book was set, and I liked the setting, and I decided I'm going to pick this one up. I rarely do that. I rarely agree to listen to a book in exchange for an honest review. I review books that I listen to as part of interviews on this podcast out of courtesy, but rarely do I sit down and say, okay, this is one that I want to listen to and I'm willing to leave a review of it on Audible, because I don't like to leave reviews on Audible. That's just my personal preference. And the reason for that is simple. When you leave a review on Audible, it becomes their property. And I don't like that. But I recognize how important it is to authors and narrators to have reviews of their work. So if something really grabs me, I will absolutely do it. And this one really grabbed me. And so I asked just for a copy. She sent it to me. I filled out the form that she has and asked for a copy, and she sent me one. I was going to listen to it the very day that I got the book. I was that excited about it. But then things got in the way, and I didn't end up listening to it that day and for days to come. And then it wasn't until the end of August that I finally listened to it. I am so glad that I did. The book in question is called Circled by Anne McEnany, and it is narrated by Laura Jennings. And this one is one that Anne McEnany published herself. And boy, am I glad I did. This one was a lot of fun. It's set in South Carolina in a small town and in swamp country. And I love that type of rural southern swamp setting. And the story is fantastic. It's about a town where two things happened in the same week 12 years previous to the beginning of the story. A girl was killed while riding her bike, and another boy went missing. That was all one day, and he was presumed to have been killed as well. The other thing was later on, there was a big lottery win, and 4 people shared a lottery ticket and won some like $16 million or something, and they split the money. And this book is about a young journalist who was a child and friends with the young people that died, and grew up and was tasked with writing a story on the events of that week, from the accidents and the lottery win, and gets into a whole mess of trouble along the way. And the story is tremendous. The payoff is wonderful. I really like the narration. Laura Jennings kind of narrates with a low whisper, and it's a little sinister, and it fits the setting so well. And there's some fun characters. There's some real scuzzbags and unlikable people that you want to see get what's coming to them, even if you're not entirely sure what's coming to them. There's fun with alligators, and there's a lot of fun with the settings, and I just loved this book so much. Once I really got into it, I didn't stop listening, and it was just an easy listen and a lot of fun, and I actually gave it a 5. I just said that I don't give out 5 stars very often, but I did in this case. It was that good. It grabbed me. It was one of those things where, even though I predicted one element of the story pretty early on, I didn't actually care that I had predicted it correctly, because I was so interested in everything else that was going on, and I just absolutely fell in love with the characters and the writing style. Maybe I'll have Anne McEnany on the show in the future to talk about just how she came up with this book. It was so much fun, and I absolutely Loved every minute of listening to it. It's called Circled. It's still up as a book that you can adopt from Jess. If you like what you're hearing in my description, you'll like the book even better, because I don't think I'm doing a fantastic job of telling you exactly why it's so great. I love the ending. There's a great sequence where news is revealed, and it's a lot of fun. And I've said that like 4 times because I really do love it.
Macy LaGrange never saw the back of her own head. If she had, she'd have noticed long strands of honey-colored hair, with an unexpected wave in the middle and a mild curl at the ends. A hat maker would have deemed it a wide head, while a modeling agency would regard it as round. But none of that mattered to the driver about to hit her. His eyes were not on Macy's head, nor were they on her rusty blue bike with the new horn and the old chain. And they most definitely were not on the road. The driver saw the 14-year-old softball star from neither the back nor the front. If he had, he'd have spied a smiling face that lit up Beulah, South Carolina, wherever it went. He'd have noticed the sneaky glint in the wide-set eyes that broadcasted a future in better places than a sleepy town on a murky swamp, sourced by a raging river. He would have swerved his 4,000 pounds of metal and parts, because he'd have appreciated how others rose up in the morning with the sole intention of making Macy LaGrange smile and, if lucky, laugh. For hers was not a reticent childhood laugh, bashful in its insecurity. No, this girl with the heart-shaped lips and ever-pink cheeks possessed a laugh worthy of a jolly, self-assured woman, one with the confidence to decide what she found funny and what she did not. And she backed that laugh up with bright, jovial eyes that danced like blue fairies against the darkness of the swamp's hungry waters. One thing the driver would have known for sure: Macy was bound for beauty inside and out, because this, her innocent, hopeful stage of life, was her awkward stage, leaving others unable to fathom what adulthood might hold. They'd never find out, of course. There were those who, after the thump, nodded knowingly at the way Macy moved on to the next dimension. She flew gracefully, almost contemplatively, through the air, the tap of the car's front bumper sending her from seated and coasting to airborne and feathery in the course of a millisecond. But in her final moment, her eyes alighted upon love, and she knew it would never leave her alone. She let it cradle her like a cocoon, and she sensed that it would follow her wherever she traveled next. As she reached the descendant portion of her trajectory toward death, she knew that it would never let her down. Chapter 2. 12 years later. My tattoo burned. I'd swear a ghost was dragging a snuffed match along the underside of my forearm. Not as bad as the days it scorched me, but still annoying. I scratched at it, after shifting my reluctant Subaru into third. But the sensation of fiery phosphorus on skin only multiplied. Maybe it was something besides my usual tattoo premonitions. I glanced down to make sure a family of fleas hadn't taken residence on my flesh. Nope, nothing but the design I'd sketched for the Inks and Kinks manager years ago. I'd slapped down a fake ID and a folded $100 bill, with only one request: no questions. 5 minutes later, the biker with the shabby beard and wonky eye had pierced and tinted my skin elbow to wrist, a series of 8-shaped links in the pattern of a long, thin oval. A strand of DNA? A tribute to infinity? Who knew? It meant different things on different days. But if I stared at it long enough, it began to move, which is usually when I put the vodka away. I glanced up and nearly clipped a Ford parked on the side of the road. Jerking my wheel to the left in response, I almost swiped Chad Riker's Blazer as it whizzed by me doing 70. High times on desolate Old Pleasant Road today. Despite the 40-mile-per-hour difference in our speeds, Chad managed to wave as he passed, proving once again what a genial ex-boyfriend he was. Chad and I had ended on good terms, because in Beulah, South Carolina, home of Black Swamp and its assorted wetlands, you either ended on good terms or you moved. Plus, he was the deputy sheriff. I'd no doubt need him as a source for future stories. We'd broken up 11 months ago.
It's available. You can go to Jess's website, theaudiobookwarden.com, and you can search for the Adopt an Audiobook link, and you can browse through the listings. And the title that I'm talking about is Circled by Anne McEnany, narrated by Laura Jennings. There's lots of other titles there as well, so if that one doesn't catch your interest, maybe something else will, and you can request a copy and you can receive one in exchange for a review. And if you look on the Circled page on Audible, if you search for Circled on Audible, this book comes up. And if you click on the link to get all the details and stuff and read reviews, you will find mine. And I absolutely thought this was a fantastic mystery story and had a lot of interesting characters. And I love that setting. I don't know why it is that I love rural settings and small town settings and settings in a swamp. And I love the show Swamp People on History Channel, and this sort of reminded me of that and that way of life and that lifestyle. It just appeals to me quite a bit. This book setting was so perfect, and I just thought it was wonderful. So you can adopt that audiobook as well if you would like. It will be worth your time. If you think your reading tastes are similar to mine, you will like the book. You might not like it as much as I did, but you will like the book and find it worthwhile. So if you think you and I have similar tastes after listening to this podcast for 17 weeks, you will like Circled. And that is my final review for this week. You'll notice that my reading or listening pattern lately has been mysteries and science fiction, and there was another book that I listened to that falls into that category as well, of a mystery and thriller. I'm not reviewing it on the show today just for time's sake more than anything else. Maybe I'll talk about it in the coming weeks. But I haven't done a lot of nonfiction listening lately, and I need to get back to that. And I hope to get back to that very soon. My current listen at the time of this recording, if you follow me on Goodreads, you already know this, but it's One Rough Man by Brad Taylor. It is the first novel in his Pike Logan series. I can't review it yet because I'm about 9 chapters in, but I will say that I knew I was going to like this book from chapter 1. Just it appealed to me right from the start, and I can't wait to finish this podcast so I can get back to listening to it. But that will be for another day. Like I said, my nonfiction listening has really slowed as of late. I need to get back to a nonfiction title. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more on the other side of this break.
The September Talking Audiobooks podcast giveaway is on. And now we've added a way for you to increase your chance to win. Just go to the website, talkingaudiobooks.com. On the right side, click on September Giveaway, and you can enter to win 4 free audiobooks from audible.com. But wait, there's more. Now you can add up to 7 additional entries to increase your chance of winning. You can earn bonus entries by visiting our website, liking Talking Audiobooks on Facebook, sharing us on Facebook, following us on Twitter, sharing us on Twitter, sharing us on Google. But wait, there's more. Now, new with the September giveaway, you can earn an additional entry for every friend you invite to join the drawing with you. No purchase necessary. All you have to do is enter. Void where prohibited by law, but who would want to prohibit you from winning 4 free audiobooks from Audible? Enter today. Get your friends to enter. Get your entries in by noon on September 28th. A winner will be randomly drawn from everyone who enters. Good luck!
It's now time for the Caught My Ear segment this week, and I have to tell you guys, this week was a tough one for me. I browsed through 7 or 8 different categories on Audible to find the titles that catch my ear and the titles that I feel like are worthy of being featured on this program. And I found a lot of books this week that I thought would be contenders for the Caught My Ear segment. The problem is that the release dates were in the future. Now that means that in the coming weeks there will be a lot of strong candidates to choose from, but for whatever reason this week not a lot grabbed me, and I don't know why that is, other than I think just the week being so close to September 11th maybe has something to do with it in terms of maybe what people want to be putting out there this week. I can't say, that's just a guess, and it's probably not even a good one. It might be me. It's possible that 5 years from now I'll pick up 3 books in an Audible sale and look at the release dates and see that they were released in this week of September 2017. So that's entirely possible that I just didn't catch everything that is out there this week. I don't every week. I look until I find things, so I don't always see everything. It took me a while to find things. One of them actually doesn't even count as a title that came out this week because it's been out for a while, but I want to talk about why this caught my ear this week, and I will do that shortly. There's a theme to this week. The theme is ancient history. And I mentioned nonfiction earlier and how I'd been on a break from reading nonfiction for a while and needed to get back into it. Well, the first title to catch my ear this week comes to us from Tantor Audio. It was released on September 12th. It has a running time of over 18 hours, and it's written by author Toby Wilkinson, narrated by Michael Page, and it is titled The Rise and Fall of Ancient Egypt. I'm a big fan of ancient history and ancient Egypt in particular, so this one is a easy grab at my attention. Very much looking forward to listening to this. I love ancient Egypt in particular, the pyramids, the mummies, and the pharaohs, and all that good stuff. Love all of it, and I want to know more about ancient Egypt, just the rise and fall as the title says, but also want to know a little bit more about the daily life in ancient Egypt as well. So the first segment I'm going to play, the first excerpt I'm going to play, is from the book The Rise and Fall of Ancient Egypt. The book actually came out in 2010, but the audiobook is coming out now, and that's why we're here. So here is an excerpt of The Rise and Fall of Ancient Egypt by Toby Wilkinson, narrated by Michael Page on the Talking Audiobooks podcast.
Have made wonderful discovery in Valley. A magnificent tomb with seals intact. Recovered same for your arrival. Congratulations. After a 17-day journey by ship and train, the Earl and Lady Evelyn arrived in Luxor to be met by an impatient and excited Carter. The very next morning, work to clear the steps began in earnest. On November 26, the outer blocking wall was removed to reveal a corridor filled with stone chips. From the pattern of disturbance running through the fill, it was clear that someone had been there before. Robbers must have entered the tomb in antiquity, but the seal impressions on the outer blocking wall showed that it had been resealed in the New Kingdom. What might this mean for the state of the burial itself? There was always the possibility that it would turn out in the end to be a private tomb or a cache of funerary equipment collected from earlier robbed tombs in the Valley of the Kings and reburied for safety. After a further day of strenuous work in the heat and dust of the valley floor, the corridor was emptied. Now, after what must have felt like an interminable wait, the way ahead was clear. Carter, Carnarvon, Calendar, and Lady Evelyn found themselves before yet another blocking wall, its surface also covered with large oval seal impressions. A slightly darker patch of plaster in the top left-hand corner of the wall showed where the ancient robbers had broken in. What would greet this next set of visitors more than 3,500 years later? Without further hesitation, Carter took his trowel and made a small hole in the plaster blocking just big enough to look through. First, as a safety precaution, he took a lighted candle and put it through the hole to test for asphyxiating gases. Then, with his face pressed against the plaster wall, he peered through into the darkness. The hot air escaping from the sealed chamber caused the candle to flicker, and it took a few moments for Carter's eyes to grow accustomed to the gloom. But then details of the room beyond began to emerge. Carter stood dumbstruck. After some minutes, Carnarvon could bear the suspense no longer. "Can you see anything?" he asked. "Yes, yes," replied Carter. "Wonderful things." The following day, Carter wrote excitedly to his friend and fellow Egyptologist Alan Gardiner, "I imagine it is the greatest find ever made." Carter and Carnarvon had discovered an intact royal tomb from the golden age of ancient Egypt. It was crammed, in Carter's own words, with enough stuff to fill the whole upstairs Egyptian section of the British Museum. The antechamber alone, the first of 4 rooms entered by Carter and his associates, contained treasures of unimaginable opulence. 3 colossal gilded ceremonial beds in the shapes of fabulous creatures, golden shrines with images of gods and goddesses, painted jewelry boxes and inlaid caskets, gilded chariots and fine archery equipment, a magnificent gold throne inlaid with silver and precious stones, vases of beautiful translucent alabaster, and, guarding the right-hand wall, 2 life-size figures of the dead king, with black skin and gold accoutrements. The royal name on many of the objects left no doubt as to the identity of the tomb owner. The hieroglyphs clearly spelled out Tut-Ankh-Amun. By curious coincidence, the breakthrough that had allowed ancient Egyptian writing to be first deciphered, and had thus opened up the study of pharaonic civilization through its numerous inscriptions, had occurred exactly a century before. In 1822, the French scholar Jean-François Champollion published his famous Lettres à Monsieur Dacier, in which he correctly described the workings of the hieroglyphic writing system and identified the phonetic values of many important signs. This turning point in the history of Egyptology was itself the result of a long period of study. Champollion's interest in ancient Egyptian writing had been prompted when he'd first learned about the Rosetta Stone as a boy. A royal proclamation inscribed in 3 scripts, Greek, Demotic characters and hieroglyphics, the stone had been discovered by Napoleonic troops at El Rashid, Rosetta, during the French invasion of 1798, when Champollion was 8 years old, and it was to provide one of the main keys to the decipherment of Egyptian hieroglyphics. Champollion's early genius for languages had enabled him to become proficient in Greek and, crucial in this endeavor, Coptic, the liturgical language of the Egyptian Orthodox Church and a direct descendant of ancient Egyptian. Armed with this knowledge and with a transcription of the Rosetta Stone, Champollion correctly translated.
I want you all to bear with me for just a moment before I play the final excerpt on the Caught My Ear segment this week, because I have a little bit of a story that goes along with how I picked this one. And that story is that earlier this week, I was sitting around thinking that I needed a new audiobook experience. I needed to try something I haven't tried before, either a new author, a new series, or a new genre or subgenre, to get away from the types of things that I normally like to listen to. And if you've been listening to this podcast for any length of time, you know what those would be. And even if this is the first episode that you listen to, take a listen to the reviews from earlier and you have a pretty good idea of the things that I like to listen to on a pretty regular basis. But I was thinking about the possibility of something new, trying something that I hadn't tried before. I was even going to come on this podcast and ask for recommendations for something that listeners thought that I might enjoy that would be outside of my usual comfort zone. So I'm sitting there thinking of this question, and I don't know what prompted me to do this, but I went to Audible and I decided to look through the great courses. And I have to tell you that I have always dismissed the great courses out of hand. I have seen the great courses appear in Audible sales before, and I just skip right past them. No interest. Don't even look at the titles. I just see that it's a lecture, and I just pass, move on. There was even a great courses sale on Audible this year, and I never even looked at it. That's how disinterested I was in anything from the great courses catalog. And I don't really have an explanation as to why that would be the case, other than the fact that I did not enjoy my time in college. College left a bad taste in my mouth. So just hearing the word lecture sends shivers running down my spine. And despite the fact that I had a lot of professors that I liked when I was in college, especially in my major, which was history, which is one reason that I am playing the excerpt that I'm going to play. So I decided that I really wasn't being fair to the great courses, and that I should at least play some excerpts for myself to see if maybe something would grab me. And so I was browsing through the catalog, and I came upon a few that I thought were interesting, and I'm going to be adding some to my library. And these will be the first time I've listened to anything from the great courses. And it works for me because A, it's familiar in that I'm familiar with the topics already and I'm comfortable with those. And B, it's different enough in that these are lectures and not strictly audiobooks. So it will be a little bit different in that regard. So it's a nice mix of the familiar and the new for me. I will report back on how I enjoyed these after I've listened to one or two of them, but I decided for this excerpt that I would excerpt one of the ones that I intend to listen to, and I picked The Other Side of History, Daily Life in the Ancient World, and this is from the Great Courses. It is narrated by Professor Robert Garland. It has a running time of 24 hours and 28 minutes approximately, and it was released on July 8th, 2013. So I'm going to give this one a try, and I'm going to play an excerpt of it for you here as well, so you'll know what I'll be listening to, and maybe you've never tried the great courses before, and maybe hearing an excerpt of one will make you want to try one of them, maybe from a different field. They have all sorts of different fields that you can pick from: science, math, economics, literature, religion, history, and many, many more that you could choose from. Maybe you've never heard one before, and maybe you've dismissed them out of hand like I haven't. Maybe you will decide to give one a try. And I picked The Ancient World here because it pairs well with the excerpt that I played from The Rise and Fall of Ancient Egypt. So without further delay, here is an excerpt from the Great Courses, The Other Side of History, Daily Life in the Ancient World, on the Talking Audiobooks podcast.
Are anonymous. They nevertheless had dreams and aspirations, just as we do. They had risen that morning with work to do, just like us. Some of them had a raging toothache. Some of them had a hangover. They loved, they hated, they got by as best they could. And yet, however much they may have been like us, they also lived in a very different world. And they were beset by very different challenges and also thought very differently from us too. All of us know the emotions of joy and anger, the feelings of hunger and anxiety. But which of us knows what it's like to be a slave? Or from the perspective of the free population, what it means to believe unhesitatingly that slavery is part of the natural order? In Caesar's house that March morning, in the Roman Forum, the center of the universe as it was then, there were men and women who had no legal or political status. They were property that could be bought or sold. They could be physically or sexually abused. They could be tossed out into the street once they had outlived their usefulness. I've been teaching Greek and Roman history for 30 years or so, and I've written separate biographies of both Julius Caesar and Hannibal. But although the events involving the great and the powerful continue to fascinate me, and though greatness in human terms fascinates me as well, what has always made history come alive for me is imagining what daily life was like for ordinary people. So I've written a book called Daily Life of the Ancient Greeks, which in essence provided me with the starting point for this course, and another book called The Greek Way of Life, which covers the life cycle from conception to old age. Whenever I think about the past, I try to put myself in the shoes, or rather, the sandals, of the people whose lives I'm investigating. The questions, what would it feel like to be a Spartan hoplite, or a Roman gladiator, or a medieval nun, enthrall me. So, this course fits my interests to a T. In a way, it's what I've been preparing for all my life. That said, I do draw the line. I've never gone in for what is called living history, dressing up as a centurion, say, and participating in simulated battles. For one thing, spectacles and Roman helmets just don't work well together. Sadly, I have to say, and I guess that rules me out as a gladiator as well. The aim of this course is to enthrall you the same way. We're going to spend our time exploring the less familiar realms of the ancient and medieval worlds. We'll be looking at what I like to call the other side of history. What do I mean by the other side of history? Well, I have three things in mind. First, we'll be asking questions that many textbooks never ask. The 19th century historian Thomas Carlyle wrote, "The history of the world is but the biography of great men." Carlyle believed it was great men and great men only who shaped history, and like all historians of his time, he thought that what really mattered about the past was politics and war. And for that reason, he and his contemporaries, and actually many history teachers to this day, were chiefly interested in kings, conquerors, statesmen, and tyrants. But if we concentrate upon those who made the headlines, so to speak, then we're leaving out 99% of the human population who have ever lived, possibly more. And that 99% deserves recognition. In this course, we'll see that it gets it. So, we're going to be asking not what it meant to wield great power in the ancient and medieval worlds, but rather what it meant to be human in those worlds, what it meant to be on the receiving end of history, so to speak. Second, I say we'll be exploring the other side of history because wherever possible, wherever our sources allow, we're going to try to understand what daily life was like for people who, in addition to being neglected by most conventional history texts, also suffered neglect and disadvantage in their own lifetime.
That is going to wrap it up for this week's episode of Talking Audiobooks. I hope you have enjoyed this episode as much as I have enjoyed bringing it to you. Next week on the Talking Audiobooks podcast, I will be sitting down with audiobook narrator Helen Lloyd, and Helen is going to talk to us all about her narration career, her acting career, and she is a student of Sean Pratt's, so we're going to talk about what it's like to be on the student end of the student-teacher relationship. We've talked to Sean before about some of his teaching methods and his philosophies, so we're going to talk to a student of his and get the other side of the stories, the student perspective on that student-teacher relationship. So I'm looking forward to bringing you that on next week's episode of Talking Audiobooks. I want to again remind you of our September giveaway. We're giving away 4 audiobooks of your choice from audible.com. And you can enter that contest by going to our website or our Facebook page or our Twitter account and finding the link that gets posted often to enter our monthly contest, and you will win 4 audiobooks of your choice if you win this giveaway. They're absolutely free, no charge to you whatsoever, no strings attached. You can pick any books that you want. We're giving away 4 of them, and that is this month's giveaway. You can check us out at talkingaudiobooks.com, facebook.com/talkingaudiobooks, or twitter.com/talkingaudio to find the link to the contest. And to connect with us on social media, you can connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, and Goodreads at Audiobook Casey. That's Audiobook CASEY, all one word. And again, as I mentioned at the start of the show, always happy to connect with new listeners to the program and audiobook fans. And in fact, just the other day, I was followed by an audiobook narrator, and I thanked them for following me, and they said, "You're welcome, just started the podcast and I absolutely love it." So that makes me happy to hear when people say that. You can also email us at feedback@talkingaudiobooks.com and tell us how much you love the Talking Audiobooks podcast, or give us an idea for a show topic or recommendation for something you think I should feature on the show. If you have an interest in being interviewed, think you would be a good guest, that's the way to reach us, is feedback@talkingaudiobooks.com. We'll try to get you into the interview queue as well that way. And you can listen to the podcast on iTunes, Google Play Music, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Spreaker, YouTube, and you can manually add our RSS feed off of our website, talkingaudiobooks.com, to your podcatcher of choice, and you can listen to us wherever you want to listen to the Talking Audiobooks podcast. That is going to wrap it up for me. As always, I want to end the show, as I do each and every week, by encouraging you guys to keep listening.
Thanks, Casey, for another great episode of Talking Audiobooks. Talking Audiobooks is hosted by Casey Trowbridge, produced by yours truly, Ken Joy, is produced by Ken Joy Media, copyright 2017, all rights reserved. All the music you hear on Talking Audiobooks is licensed through epidemicmusic.com. If at any time during one of the clips that we're playing from an audiobook here on the podcast you happen to hear this, it means we've bleeped out a word that is unsuitable for the ratings this podcast carries on iTunes. It does not appear in the actual audiobook when you purchase it from Audible or another vendor. The information and opinions you hear expressed on the podcast are those of our host and our guests and do not necessarily reflect the opinions or beliefs of our sponsors. Make sure you visit the website at talkingaudiobooks.com and enter this month's giveaway. See you next time.